The first time Everett Cole saw Marin Vale look afraid, she was barefoot in the service alley behind a Chicago museum, one hand braced against a dumpster, the other clawing weakly at the sleeve of the man trying to force her into a black SUV. Inside the museum, 200 donors were still clapping for themselves beneath a ceiling of painted angels, raising champagne glasses to children's hospitals and clean water charities while string musicians played something soft enough to make wealth sound gentle. Outside, November rain had turned the alley pavement black and glossy, and the most powerful woman Everett had ever met was slipping toward the ground in a silver evening gown, her eyes unfocused, her voice thick with terror. "I told you," she mumbled, trying and failing to shove the man away. "You put something in it." The man holding her upright gave a quick, nervous glance toward the alley mouth, and Everett felt his stomach tighten before his mind had time to catch up. He knew that man. Everybody at Vale Meridian knew him. Corbin Rusk, chief financial officer, polished as marble and just as cold, the kind of executive who could smile while announcing layoffs and make it sound like mercy. Beside him stood a broad security contractor with a shaved head and gloved hands. The engine of the SUV idled hard enough to vibrate through the soles of Everett's worn dress shoes. For one breath, Everett did what most men in his position would have done. He stayed in the shadow of the loading dock and told himself it was none of his business. He was a mid-level compliance auditor with a sick little girl at home, a rent payment already late, and a babysitter who would start charging double in 11 minutes. He had come to the gala only because attendance had not technically been mandatory, which in corporate language meant it absolutely was. He had stood for 3 hours near the back wall in a thrift store suit, smiling when spoken to, drinking tap water with a twist of lemon, because even one cocktail felt like theft from his daughter's prescription fund. He had no driver waiting, no townhouse, no cushion, no allies upstairs. He had his badge, his bus pass, and the kind of life that broke if one wrong person decided to lean on it. But then Corbin bent close to Marin's face and said, "You're not going home tonight. You're going somewhere quiet until the directors understand you're no longer fit." And Everett heard another sentence underneath it, one spoken years before in an army field hospital outside Kandahar by a boy who had lost too much blood and kept whispering, "Don't leave me here." Everett had not left him either. Not until the medevac came. Not until there was nothing more he could do. Some instincts did not retire just because a man traded a uniform for spreadsheets. He stepped out of the shadows with his phone raised like he was already recording. "Marin?" he called, making his voice carry down the wet brick walls as if they were old friends. "There you are. Car's out front, but the driver couldn't get around the barricades. I told him I'd walk you over." Corbin spun toward him, the muscles in his jaw tightening when he recognized the face. "Cole," he said, each letter sharpened. "Walk away." Everett crossed the alley before fear could talk him out of it. He kept his shoulders loose, his eyes steady, his thumb hovering over the emergency call screen. "She looks like she needs a hospital." "She's intoxicated." Then an ambulance would be safest. Marin lifted her head a fraction. Rain had flattened dark strands of hair against her cheek. "No hospital," she whispered. "He owns people." Corbin's eyes flicked to her, then back to Everett, and in that small movement Everett saw the shape of the thing clearly enough. This was not an embarrassing executive meltdown. This was a removal, a disappearance dressed in concern. "You have no idea what you're interrupting," Corbin said quietly. "I know enough." "No, you don't. You know payroll codes and policy memos. You know how to flag duplicate invoices. You do not know men like me." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so the guard would not hear all of it. "Go home to your daughter, Everett. Lily, isn't it? Fragile lungs, plenty of hospital nights. Imagine making life harder for her because you wanted to play hero for a woman who wouldn't remember your name tomorrow." Everett felt the old heat rise in him, sudden and clean. His daughter's name in Corbin's mouth changed the air. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten with his fists. He simply lifted the phone higher and smiled without warmth. I'm going to count to 3. If you and your friend are still touching her when I'm done, I start yelling that the CFO of Vale Meridian drugged the CEO outside a charity gala. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm crazy. But there are photographers around the corner, donors everywhere, and half the city's social pages looking for a story. Let's see which one of us survives the headline. The alley seemed to hold its breath. Rain ticked against the SUV roof. Somewhere inside the museum, applause rose again, bright and distant, belonging to another world. Corbin looked at the guard, then at Marin, then toward the street. His face did not show defeat so much as calculation postponed. You just made yourself useful to the wrong side, he said. Useful men get used up. He released Marin so abruptly that she almost folded. Everett caught her under the arms before she hit the pavement. Corbin slid into the SUV, the guard following. The vehicle pulled away fast, tires hissing through dirty water, and Everett stood in the alley with the rain soaking through his cheap jacket, and Marin Vale trembling against him like any other frightened human being. "Where can I take you?" he asked. Her fingers closed weakly around his lapel. Not my condo. Not company security. Corbin has the night staff. Hospital? She shook her head with such panic that he stopped asking. He'll find me. Everett looked toward Michigan Avenue, toward the glowing museum entrance, toward every sensible choice he had already lost. Then he thought of Lily asleep on the fold-out sofa in their apartment, her inhaler lined up beside her water cup, trusting that he would always come home. All right, he said. Then you're coming with me. His pickup was 6 blocks away in a parking garage he could barely afford, even at the employee discounted event rate. An old blue Ford with a cracked windshield and a heater that only worked if the fan knob was wedged between settings. Everett half-carried Marin through the rain, past caterers smoking under an awning, and a valet too busy scrolling his phone to notice that a woman whose face appeared on business magazines was sagging against an exhausted father in scuffed shoes. Twice she tried to speak. Twice the words dissolved into a shallow breath. He buckled her into the passenger seat and tucked his suit coat over her bare arms, leaving himself in a thin white shirt that clung coldly to his back. As he drove south and west through the wet city, he kept checking the mirrors, taking turns he did not need to take, slipping beneath the elevated tracks and through neighborhoods where high-rises gave way to brick two-flats and corner stores with bars over the windows. Marin drifted in and out. Once, near the river, she grabbed his wrist and whispered, "Director's vote." Another time she said, "My father knew," and began to cry without sound. Everett had watched powerful people cry before, but usually from a distance, in conference rooms after numbers went bad or reputations cracked. This was different. There was no performance in it, no audience, just a woman drugged and hunted in the passenger seat of a poor man's truck. His apartment was above a shuttered tailor shop in Pilsen, 2 rooms, unreliable heat, a view of the alley, and pipes that knocked at night like someone trying to get in. Mrs. Alvarez from downstairs was sitting with Lily when he arrived, half asleep in an armchair with a rosary looped around her fingers and a telenovela glowing silently on the television. She took one look at Everett, carrying the unconscious woman in the ruined gown, and opened her mouth. Everett shook his head once. "Please," he said. Alvarez had lived long enough to recognize trouble that should not be questioned at the door. She gathered her cardigan, accepted the folded bills Everett pressed into her hand, and touched his sleeve before leaving. "Lock both locks," she whispered. He did. Then he carried Marin to his bed, the one he usually shared with Lily on nights when her coughing frightened them both, and laid her on top of the faded blue quilt his mother had made before cancer thinned her hands. He removed Marin's wet shoes, set a trash can nearby in case she became sick, and placed a glass of water and 2 aspirin on the overturned milk crate he used as a nightstand. He considered calling someone, police, paramedics, anyone with authority. But Corbin's voice had left a stain in his mind. He owns people. Everett did not know whether that was true, but he knew men like Corbin rarely gambled without insurance. In the living room, Lily slept curled under a blanket printed with faded constellations, her hair spread across the pillow, her small hand resting against the silver charm she wore every day. Everett knelt beside her and listened for the familiar wheeze. Her breathing was steady tonight. Thank God. He brushed a curl from her forehead and felt the hard little weight of the charm beneath the blanket. A crescent-shaped silver pendant on a chain too expensive for anything else in their life. Nora had clasped it around Lily's neck the morning before she disappeared, saying it had belonged to someone who needed remembering. At the time, Everett had been too tired and angry to ask what that meant. He had spent the next 3 years asking in silence. He dragged the kitchen table against the front door, set his old service flashlight within reach, and sat on the floor beside Lily because there was nowhere else to sleep. Rain tapped the windows. The pipes knocked. Every passing car slowed in his imagination. Near dawn, exhaustion took him in jagged pieces, and his last thought before sleep was not about his job or Corbin or even the woman in his bed. It was the same prayer he whispered every night. Let Lily wake up breathing. She woke before he did, as always, because children with hard lives learn the household rhythms early. Everett opened his eyes to the smell of coffee and the soft scrape of a chair across linoleum. Lily stood on a step stool at the counter in her purple pajama pants, carefully spreading peanut butter on toast with the seriousness of a surgeon. "Daddy," she whispered when she saw him stir. "There's a princess in your room." Everett sat up too fast, pain flashing through his neck. "She's not a princess. She has sparkles on her dress. That doesn't make somebody a princess." Lily considered this, then nodded as if accepting an important legal distinction. Her pendant had slipped outside her shirt, catching the gray morning light. Everett rose, stiff and cold, and started the coffee stronger than usual. His phone showed 14 missed calls from numbers he did not recognize, 2 from Vale Meridian's main switchboard, 1 from his supervisor, and a text from an unknown sender that said simply, "Last chance to stay out of this." He deleted nothing. The bedroom door opened before he could decide what to do. Marin Vale stood in the frame, one hand pressed to the wall, her face pale, her dark hair tangled over one shoulder. Without heels, without the architectural dress and the armor of lighting and status, she seemed smaller than she had on stage, though not weak. Her eyes had cleared. Pain lived in them now, and fury. She scanned the apartment in one swift sweep, the peeling paint, the drying laundry, the space heater, Lily's drawings taped above the sink, Everett standing barefoot in a wrinkled shirt with a coffee pot in his hand. "You're Everett Cole," she said. "Internal Compliance, Midwest Division." It was so absurdly like her to remember his department before saying good morning that he almost laughed. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me that." She winced and touched her temple. "Where am I?" "My apartment. You told me not to take you home." Her gaze sharpened. "Corbin tried to put you in a car. He drugged me. I figured." "The board meets tomorrow at 9, she said, more to herself than to him. "He'll invoke the stability clause. He'll say grief made me erratic. He'll have doctors, affidavits, security statements. He'll tell them I vanished with a male employee after embarrassing myself at a public event." Everett poured coffee into a chipped mug with a cartoon bear on it because all his other mugs were dirty. That sounds about right. Marin stared at him, thrown for half a second by the plainness of his answer. Then Lily climbed down from the stool and approached with the solemn hospitality of a child raised by a man who made kindness out of scarcity. "You can have my toast if your stomach hurts," she said. "Peanut butter helps after medicine, except not my medicine because mine tastes like pennies." Marin looked down at her, and something in her expression shifted so slightly Everett might have missed it if he had not spent years watching faces for danger. "Thank you," she said. "What's your name?" "Lily Cole. I'm 7.5. Marin Vale. I know, Daddy's company has your picture in the lobby. You look meaner there." Everett closed his eyes. "Lily." But Marin surprised him. A faint sound escaped her, not quite a laugh, too bruised to be one. "That photograph is terrible." Lily smiled, reassured, and reached for her toast. The silver pendant swung forward on its chain, and the room changed. It was not dramatic at first. There was no thunder, no music, no shattering revelation announced by the world. Marin simply stopped moving. The coffee mug in her hand tilted. Brown liquid spilled over her fingers, and she did not seem to feel the burn. Her eyes fixed on the pendant as if she had seen a dead person step through the wall. "Where did you get that?" Her voice had gone thin. Lily looked down. "My mama gave it to me." Everett moved closer, suddenly alert. "It's all right, sweetheart." Marin set the mug down badly. It clattered against the counter but did not break. She crouched in front of Lily, careful not to touch the chain. Tears filled her eyes so fast they seemed pulled from somewhere older than the night before. "May I see it?" Lily glanced at Everett. He nodded once, though unease had begun to crawl up his spine. Lily lifted the pendant. It was a crescent moon wrapped around a tiny engraved star. Heavy silver darkened at the edges with age. On the back were 3 letters Everett had never been able to explain. S. L. Marin covered her mouth. For several seconds she could not speak. When she finally did, the words came out broken. "My brother wore that under his dress shirt at every family dinner from the time he was 16. Sterling Vale Langford. He hated the Langford, so he used to tell people the L stood for lucky." Everett felt the room tilt. "That's not possible. We buried him with it. Maybe there was another one." "There wasn't." Marin stood slowly, her face turning from grief to something colder and more dangerous. "My brother was killed 4 years ago by a hit-and-run driver after leaving a foundation meeting. The police said the car was stolen, then destroyed. Witnesses changed statements. The investigation collapsed. Corbin was my fiancé then. He handled everything when I couldn't stand up straight. He stood beside me at the funeral. He watched them close the casket." Everett backed toward a chair and sat because his legs had begun to lose their purpose. Nora had given that pendant to Lily with shaking hands. Nora had kissed Lily's hair so many times the child had squirmed, then left a note on the kitchen table saying she was sorry, saying she could not live inside the fear anymore, saying Everett and Lily were better off without her. He had believed her because pain often accepts the cruelest answer first. Marin's eyes locked onto his. "Your wife. What was her name?" "Nora." His voice sounded unfamiliar. "Nora Bennett Cole. What did she do?" "Legal records clerk. Contract work mostly. She temped at Sable and King for 6 months before she vanished." Marin gripped the edge of the counter. Sable and King handled confidential settlements for Vale Meridian executives. Everett looked at his sleeping daughter's inhaler on the counter, at the stack of hospital bills held together with a binder clip, at the pendant that had been touching Lily's chest for 3 years like a secret heartbeat. "Nora came home one night scared out of her mind," he said. "Wouldn't tell me why. Said she had opened the wrong archive box. said there were names on papers that should never be together. I thought she was having a breakdown. I was working nights then. Lily had just been discharged again. We were behind on everything. Nora kept saying she had ruined us. The memory rose fresh and merciless. Nora at the sink with both hands over her mouth, Nora flinching at headlights through the blinds, Nora folding Lily's clothes, though none needed folding. 2 days later, she was gone. Marin's voice became very quiet. Corbin killed my brother. Everett looked at her. She did not say it like a theory. She said it like a door finally opening. Nora found proof, he whispered, and he made her disappear, or made her run. For 3 years I told my daughter her mother loved her but couldn't come home. Some days I didn't even believe myself. His hands curled on his knees. He wanted to break something. He wanted to go back to every night he had cursed Nora in his heart while heating soup from a can. Every morning he had watched Lily stare out the window on her birthday. Every hospital visit when the nurse asked for mother's information and he had said, "Not available." Marin, who had spent years being called merciless, did not offer him a clean comfort. She only said, "Then we find out the truth." Before Everett could answer, 3 hard knocks struck the downstairs door, then another set on the stairwell entrance. Not neighbor knocks, not landlord knocks. Heavy, coordinated, official without being lawful. Lily froze. Marin turned toward the sound, all grief erased beneath command. "Did anyone know you brought me here?" "No." Everett grabbed his phone and saw a new message. "You should have taken the warning." A crash sounded below, then Mrs. Alvarez shouting in Spanish, then the thud of boots on the stairs. Everett's body moved before fear could. "Lily, shoes, backpack, now!" She obeyed with the white-faced speed of a child who knew her father did not use that voice unless the world had become dangerous. Everett pulled the kitchen table away from the door, not to open it but to buy 3 seconds later. He took the old army flashlight in one hand, his keys in the other, and pointed Marin toward the bedroom. "Fire escape. In this dress? Unless you can fly." She moved. Lily shoved her feet into sneakers without socks and grabbed the little yellow backpack Everett kept ready with medicine, documents, and an emergency $20 bill tucked behind a coloring book. The apartment door shook under the first impact. The deadbolt held. The second strike splintered the frame. Everett pushed Lily through the bedroom window into Marin's waiting arms, then climbed after her as the door gave way behind them. Cold rain slapped his face. The fire escape trembled beneath their weight. From inside, a man shouted, "Window!" Everett yanked the sash down and jammed the flashlight through the metal track. A bullet or a baton struck glass behind them, he never knew which, and the window burst inward as they clattered down the iron stairs. Marin carried Lily for one landing, then handed her to Everett when her bare foot slipped. They dropped into the alley, ran past trash bins and sleeping pigeons, cut through the rear of a bakery where the owner yelled until he saw Everett's face and simply pointed toward the front. They emerged into morning traffic smelling of wet bread and diesel. Everett did not go to his truck. He saw a black sedan idling half a block from it. Instead, he led them into a bus already sighing at the curb, pushed crumpled bills into the fare box, and pulled Marin and Lily down behind a cluster of nurses heading home from night shift. Marin sat rigid beside the window, silver gown hidden beneath Everett's old raincoat, her bare feet tucked under the seat. Lily pressed against her side, breathing fast. Without thinking, Marin wrapped an arm around the child, not delicately, not for show, but with fierce possession. Everett saw it and looked away because tenderness at the wrong moment could undo him. The bus lurched forward. Chicago slid past in gray streaks. For 10 minutes, no one spoke. Then Lily whispered, "Are the bad men mad because of my necklace?" Everett knelt in the aisle in front of her, ignoring the curious glance of a nurse nearby. They're mad because they did something wrong and don't want anyone to know. Did Mama know? The question hit him harder than Corbin's threat. Everett took Lily's hands. They were cold. I think Mama may have been trying to protect us. Lily's eyes filled but did not spill. Then we should protect her back. Marin turned her face toward the window, and Everett saw her blink hard. When she looked at him again, her voice had steadied into the tone that had made rooms full of older men go silent. I know where Corbin keeps what he can't risk on company servers. Everett frowned. You're sure? My father suspected him before he died. He didn't have proof, but he told me Corbin had a habit of storing leverage near physical assets he controlled personally. Not headquarters, not cloud systems, somewhere ugly, practical, overlooked. That narrows it down to half the Midwest for a logistics company. A records depot in Cicero. Officially, it stores expired shipping manifests and insurance files. Unofficially, my father once told me it was the only place in the company where Corbin never let IT rotate staff. Everett's mind, trained by years of audits and years of survival, began arranging the pieces. Air-gapped server? Likely. Security? Private. Cameras? Yes. Access. Mine may still work unless he's already locked it. Everett looked at Lily. We can't bring her into that. Marin followed his gaze. Do you have anyone you trust? The answer should have been no. Poverty narrowed trust because asking for help too often turned friendship into debt. But there was one person. My old platoon sergeant runs a boxing gym near Little Village, Everett said. He owes me nothing, which is why I trust him. Ray DeLuca opened the back door of Southside Saints Boxing Club holding a mop in one hand and a rosary tattoo visible on the other. He was 61, built like a retired bulldozer, with a left knee that predicted weather and eyes that had seen enough war to distrust every official story. He took in Everett soaked to the skin, Lily clutching her backpack, and Marin Vale in a torn evening gown under a men's raincoat. Then he stepped aside without a question. The gym smelled of leather, bleach, coffee, and old sweat. Heavy bags swayed slightly in the draft. A teenage boy skipping rope in the ring stopped and stared until Ray barked, "School!" and the boy vanished through the front. Ray led them into his office, which contained a desk, 2 folding chairs, a cot, and photographs of young men in uniform who had come home changed or not at all. Lily had been there before on Saturdays when Everett repaired the gym's ancient boiler in exchange for letting her sit ringside with a coloring book. She relaxed by half an inch. Ray found her a clean sweatshirt and a packet of crackers, then listened while Everett told the story with Marin filling in the names that made it worse. He did not interrupt. When Everett finished, Ray leaned back and looked at Marin. You're the woman whose company denied Everett's family leave extension when his kid was in ICU. Everett flinched. Ray! Marin did not defend herself. For once, no statement had been prepared for her. I didn't know. That's what people with offices upstairs always say. She absorbed it because it was true enough to hurt. Then I should have known. Ray studied her for a long moment, then gave a single grunt, which in his language meant the first inch of respect had been granted. Kid stays here. I've got 3 veterans in the building, 2 security cameras that work, and a shotgun I'm too old to be scared of using. Everett crouched beside Lily. You listen to Mr. Ray. Medicine on schedule. No opening doors. Lily nodded, then grabbed his sleeve. You'll come back? Always. That's not a promise people can always keep. The sentence belonged to a child who had learned absence too early. Everett swallowed. Then I'll make the promise I can keep. I will do everything in me to come back. She studied him, deciding whether that was enough, then reached behind her neck and unclasped the pendant. Take it. No, Lil. It's proof, right? Her chin trembled. "Mama left it with me because she couldn't tell us, so take it and make people listen." Everett held out his palm. The silver crescent landed there with a weight no object that small should have had. Marin watched with an expression that seemed to contain her brother, her father, Everett's wife, and the child brave enough to surrender the last thing her mother had touched. "I'll bring it back," Everett said. Lily nodded, but she looked at Marin. "You bring my dad back." Marin's answer came without hesitation. "I will." Everett wanted to tell his daughter not to put faith in rich strangers, not to trust anyone whose world had nearly swallowed theirs whole, but he had seen Marin in the bus, shielding Lily with her own body. Sometimes trust began not as certainty, but as the absence of another choice. Ray drove them to Cicero in an old gym van with rust over the wheel wells and a cracked decal of boxing gloves on the side. He said nothing on the way, except to tell Everett there was a burner phone in the glove box and a first aid kit under the seat. Marin changed in the back behind a hanging towel into spare gym clothes that swallowed her frame. Gray sweatpants, a black hoodie, and a pair of boxing shoes one size too large. Without the dress, she looked less like a CEO and more like someone's exhausted sister on the worst morning of her life. Yet when they reached the records depot, her spine straightened. The building sat between a frozen food warehouse and a tire recycler, a low concrete block with no sign except a faded unit number and a security camera tucked beneath the roofline. Trucks groaned past on the wet frontage road. Everett watched the entrance for 6 minutes, counting cameras, exits, and the rhythm of the guard who stepped outside to smoke beneath a metal awning. "Once we go in, he knows," he said. "He already knows." Marin held up her phone. "My access to the main board portal was revoked 20 minutes ago. He's moving." Everett looked at the depot and felt the old, familiar narrowing of time before a bad decision. "Then we move faster." They crossed during the guard's second drag. Marin placed her thumb on the side door scanner. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then the lock clicked. Inside, the air smelled of damp paper, machine oil, and dust. Rows of storage cages stretched under fluorescent lights. Somewhere deeper in the building, servers hummed behind a locked room, pretending to be an electrical closet. Everett found it by sound. Marin's badge opened the outer door, but the inner keypad required a code. Everett removed the panel with the small screwdriver on his key ring, exposing wires and a cheap bypass board. Marin watched him work. Auditors usually know how to do that. Fathers with old cars and broken appliances learn a lot. And soldiers? Soldiers learn which doors matter. The lock released. Inside the room, 3 server towers blinked in a metal rack beside a desk holding a monitor, a keyboard, and a paper shredder with fresh strips inside. Everett sat, cracked his knuckles once, and began. Numbers calmed him. Systems made sense when people did not. He moved through directories with names designed to look like dead inventory batches, found encrypted containers beneath obsolete shipping software, and used Corbin's own lazy arrogance against him. Executives loved complexity, but hated inconvenience. The password vault was hidden well, the recovery phrase was not. It lived in a scanned image of a signed procurement form, the first letters of each line spelling out the name of Corbin's dead hunting dog. Everett almost laughed. "What?" Marin asked. "Rich criminals are still just people who reuse passwords." The first ledger opened at 11:17 a.m. By 11:21, Everett had found payments routed through consulting vendors that did no consulting, legal retainers billed to cases that did not exist, transfers to a judge's family foundation, a retired detective's boat repair company, a medical evaluator in Lake Forest, and a private psychiatric facility in Wisconsin that had prepared unsigned intake paperwork for Marin Vale dated that very morning. She read over his shoulder and went still. Everett kept digging. He searched the date of Sterling Vale's death and found vehicle telemetry from a company SUV that should have been in a garage but had instead crossed the river at 12:43 a.m., stopped near the foundation building at 12:51, accelerated hard at 12:56, and returned with front-end damage logged as loading dock impact. Marin made no sound. Everett copied everything. Then he searched Nora's name. Nothing. He tried Bennett, Cole, Sable, and King. Records clerk, witness, Portland. The word appeared in a payment memo so small he nearly missed it. NB stipend. Orchard House Trust. Monthly. Active. Everett's fingers stopped over the keys. She's alive. Marin leaned closer. You're sure? Payments started 6 days after she disappeared. Same amount every month. Housing, medical, living expenses, routed through a trust in Oregon. His voice cracked, despite his effort to hold it steady. He didn't kill her. Relief did not come gently. It struck him like grief in reverse, knocking the air from his chest. Nora alive meant Nora suffering. Nora silent. Nora somewhere far away, carrying the same years he had carried from the other side of an impossible wall. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes for 1 second, then forced himself back to the screen. I'm copying the trust documents. Everett, Marin said. He heard the warning before he heard the alarm. A red light began pulsing above the door. Somewhere outside, a shutter rolled down over the loading bay. On the monitor, a remote wipe command initialized. Everett swore softly and jammed Ray's burner phone cable into the side port, dumping files to both a flash drive and an encrypted cloud relay he had once built to back up Lily's medical forms. Progress crawled. 30%. 42. The server fan screamed. Footsteps pounded beyond the hall. Marin picked up a metal chair and wedged it beneath the door handle. 58. 69. A man hit the door from outside. The chair jumped. Everett. I know. 81. Another impact. The door frame cracked. 94. The wipe command reached active directories. Everett grabbed the drive at 98 because sometimes perfect was a luxury poor men could not afford. Go! They ran through the cage rows as 2 guards burst into the server room behind them. Marin, in oversized boxing shoes, moved with pure fury and no grace, knocking over a stack of archive boxes to block the aisle. Everett pulled a fire alarm as they passed, and the building erupted in shrieking bells and descending emergency lights. They exited through a side corridor into rain and truck exhaust, sprinted across the road, and dove into Ray's van as he rolled before the door had fully shut. Well? Ray asked. Everett held up the drive. Marin looked out the rear window at the depot shrinking behind them. Her face was wet, whether from rain or tears, Everett could not tell. We have him, she said, but her voice did not sound triumphant. It sounded like a woman realizing proof did not resurrect the dead. Back at the gym, Lily ran into Everett's arms so hard he had to sit on the floor to hold her. He gave her the pendant, but she pushed it back against his chest. Not yet, she said. Finish. So he did. All afternoon and into evening, Everett worked at Ray's desk while Marin called the few people in her world whose loyalty had been tested by something stronger than money. Not many answered. Fewer stayed on the line after hearing Corbin's name, but 2 did. A federal securities investigator Marin's father had once helped, and a homicide detective nearing retirement who had never believed the official story of Sterling Vale's death. By midnight, the files had been duplicated in 6 places. By 2 in the morning, affidavits were being drafted. By 4, Everett had spoken to a legal aid attorney in Portland who confirmed that Orchard House Trust paid rent for a woman living under protection outside Salem. The attorney would not give a direct address over the phone, but she paused when Everett said Nora's name, and that pause became the first mercy he had received in years. She asks about a little girl every month, the attorney said quietly. She sends letters she never mails. Everett bowed his head over Ray's desk, surrounded by fight posters and tax receipts, and wept without sound. Marin stood in the doorway and did not intrude. Later, when the sky outside began to pale, she handed him coffee. My father used to say character is what remains after fear has taken everything it can, she said. Everett took the cup. Your father sounds wiser than most executives I've met. He was, and still not wise enough to see Corbin clearly. None of us saw what we needed to. Marin looked toward the gym floor, where Lily slept on a cot under Ray's old army blanket. I saw quarterly results, expansion plans, director politics. I did not see the people keeping the company upright. I did not see you. Everett followed her gaze. Most people don't. That changes today. He almost smiled, not because he believed change came that easily, but because she sounded as if she intended to drag the world by its collar until it obeyed. Today might get ugly. Good, she said. Ugly truth is cleaner than beautiful lies. At 9 o'clock Monday morning, the top-floor boardroom of Vale Meridian filled with men and women who had built careers on never looking surprised. The room overlooked the Chicago River, gray and bright beneath winter sunlight, and everything in it had been chosen to suggest permanence. Walnut walls, leather chairs, a table polished enough to reflect the skyline, portraits of founders who had profited from storms they did not personally stand in. Corbin Rusk stood near Marin's empty chair in a navy suit, his expression grave, his voice lowered to the register of reluctant duty. No one in this room wants this, he said, though several did. Marin has carried terrible burdens since her father's passing. Her brother's death before that. We have all admired her discipline, but discipline can hide collapse until it becomes dangerous. Saturday night's incident at the gala was not isolated. We have medical opinions prepared, security statements, evidence of erratic conduct. For the good of Vale Meridian and its 38,000 employees, I am asking this board to activate the continuity clause and appoint interim leadership. A director named Elaine Porter frowned down at the folder before her. Has anyone spoken with Marin directly? Corbin's sorrowful expression tightened by a millimeter. She is not reachable. That is not what I asked. Before he could answer, the boardroom doors opened. Marin walked in wearing a charcoal suit borrowed from an attorney 2 inches shorter than she was, her hair pulled back, her face pale but steady. She did not look like a woman untouched by fear. She looked like one who had walked through it and brought evidence. Everett entered beside her in the same worn suit he had worn to the gala, now dried badly and wrinkled at the knees. Behind them came 2 federal investigators, Detective Anika Bell from Chicago Homicide, and a quiet man from the state attorney's office carrying a sealed warrant. The room did what powerful rooms do when power changes direction. It went silent. Corbin's face emptied. Only for a second, but Everett saw it. So did Marin. Good morning, she said, taking her seat at the head of the table. I believe you were discussing my stability. Corbin recovered quickly because men like him practiced recovery more than remorse. Marin, thank God. We were worried. You've been manipulated. This employee, Mr. Cole, saved my life. Her voice cracked across the room, not loud, but absolute. You will refer to him with respect. Everett felt every eye turn toward him, measuring the cheap suit, the tired face, the man they had passed in elevators without seeing. He stepped to the display console and inserted the drive. His hands did not shake until he noticed at the far end of the table Corbin staring at him with the same hatred from the alley. Everett thought of Lily surrendering the pendant. He thought of Nora writing letters she never mailed. He thought of all the years a rich man had purchased silence with stolen money and other people's pain. Then his hands steadied. Over the past 4 years, he began, Corbin Rusk directed at least $18 million through false vendors, shell retainers, and unauthorized discretionary accounts. Those funds were used to obstruct a homicide investigation, bribe witnesses, prepare fraudulent medical confinement documents for Ms. Vale, and maintain coercive payments to at least one civilian witness. The screen filled with transfers, dates, signatures, vehicle logs, and scanned correspondence. No flourish, no theatrics, just numbers, and numbers had a way of stripping lies naked. A murmur moved through the board. Corbin laughed once, sharp and ugly. "This is absurd. A desperate employee fabricating records to impress a compromised CEO." Everett pressed another key. The company SUV telemetry appeared beside the original police timeline from the night Sterling Vale died. Detective Bell stepped forward. "That telemetry matches unreleased details from the crime scene." Corbin's eyes darted to the exits. Marin reached into her pocket and placed the silver crescent pendant on the table. It made a small sound, but in that room it landed like judgment. "My brother's pendant," she said. "Removed from his body before burial and hidden because someone needed leverage against the man who killed him." Elaine Porter pushed back from the table, her hand at her throat. Another director whispered, "Corbin, what did you do?" He came apart, not all at once, but in pieces. First, the solemn mask, then the injured innocence, then the gentleman's posture. "You think she cares about you?" He snapped at Everett, pointing across the table. "You think any of them do? You're a clerk with a sob story. You found files you don't understand." Everett looked at him for a long moment. There were things he could have said. He could have told Corbin about Lily gasping through a nebulizer while Everett argued with insurance over coverage. He could have told him about Nora's empty side of the bed, about birthdays with one less chair, about humiliation folded into every overdue notice. He could have shouted. Instead, he said, "I understand enough." Corbin lunged toward the console, but Detective Bell was already moving. The state attorney's investigator caught his arm, another officer took the other, and Corbin Rusk, who had spent years making people disappear behind signatures and sealed agreements, was forced face down against the polished boardroom table while handcuffs closed around his wrists. The sound was quieter than Everett expected, less like victory than a door finally locking. "Corbin Rusk," Detective Bell said, "you are under arrest for obstruction, conspiracy, fraud, kidnapping-related offenses, and suspicion in the vehicular homicide of Sterling Vale." As they hauled him upright, Corbin twisted toward Marin. "Your father would have lost the company without me." Marin stood, her face white with grief and rage held under iron control. "My father would rather have lost every dollar than become you." They took him out past directors who could not meet Marin's eyes. When the doors closed, the city beyond the windows seemed almost indecently calm. The federal investigator began speaking about warrants, preservation orders, emergency governance procedures. Directors asked careful, frightened questions. Marin answered them because the company still existed, employees still depended on payroll, and truth, however dramatic, did not excuse the ordinary work of repair. Everett stood apart from the table, suddenly exhausted down to the bone. He had expected the reveal to feel larger, cleaner. Instead, he felt the weight of what came after. Justice was not one moment. It was a long road of statements, hearings, frightened witnesses, reopened graves, and a woman in Oregon who had missed 3 years of her daughter's life because a man with money had decided her family was disposable. Marin came to him when the room finally thinned. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she handed him a folder. "A plane is waiting at Midway." He stared at it. "Portland?" "Salem." The attorney agreed to meet you. Detective Bell has already contacted Oregon authorities. Nora is being protected, properly this time. Everett opened the folder and saw flight documents, a temporary custody travel letter for Lily, contact names, and an address written on a separate sealed page. His vision blurred. I can't pay for this. You're not. Marin, do not turn dignity into stubbornness, Everett. Let someone help you carry what should never have been placed on your back. He looked at her then, really looked. The woman from the lobby photograph was gone, or maybe she had never been complete. Before him stood someone still powerful, still imperfect, but awake in a way pain sometimes forced people to become. What happens to the company? He asked. It survives if it deserves to, changes if I have the courage, fails if I don't. And me? A small, tired smile touched her mouth. When you come back, Vale Meridian will need a chief ethics and controls officer with authority over executive conduct. Someone difficult to frighten. Someone who remembers that policies are supposed to protect people, not bury them. Everett let out a breath that almost became a laugh. I don't have the pedigree for that. No, Marin said. You have better. He looked toward the pendant still in her hand. Lily wanted it back. Marin closed her fingers around it once, saying goodbye to her brother all over again, then placed it in Everett's palm. Then take it to her. At the doorway, he paused. You asked me in my apartment why I stepped in. I remember. I've been angry a long time. At Nora, at the company, at people like you. People. You had reason. Maybe. But that night in the alley, you weren't a company. You were just someone being taken. Marin's eyes shone, but she did not look away. Thank you for seeing me when I had no power. Everett nodded. Thank you for seeing us now. He left before either of them could make the moment too polished to be true. Ray was waiting downstairs with Lily in the gym van, the engine running, her backpack on her lap, her inhaler in the side pocket, her face pale with hope she was afraid to trust. Everett opened the sliding door and climbed in. For a second, he could not speak. Lily searched his eyes, then saw the pendant in his hand. Mama? Everett pulled her into his arms. She's alive, he whispered. Lily did not make a sound at first. She simply folded into him, small shoulders shaking, one hand clutching the back of his suit jacket, the other closing around the silver crescent that had carried more truth than any adult had dared speak. Ray drove without comment, wiping his eyes once and pretending it was the weather. The plane lifted through low clouds that afternoon, carrying a tired father and his daughter west over fields already fading toward winter. Lily slept with her head against Everett's arm, the pendant warm again at her throat. Everett watched the clouds break open beneath the sun and thought of Nora somewhere under that same light, alive, waiting or fearing, or maybe no longer believing rescue was possible. He did not know what forgiveness would look like when they stood face to face. He did not know how to rebuild a family from secrets, terror, and lost years. But for the first time in a long while, the unknown did not feel only like a threat. It felt like a door. Back in Chicago, Marin Vale stood alone in her brother's office, where Corbin had once offered condolences with blood on his hands. She opened the blinds, letting hard winter light wash over the dust, the framed photographs, the silent furniture. Then she called Human Resources and ordered an immediate review of every denied hardship claim from the last 5 years, starting with Everett Coles. It would not bring back Sterling. It would not restore Nora's lost birthdays or erase Lily's hospital nights. But truth had entered the building, and this time it would not be escorted out through a service alley. It would sit at the head of the table. It would read every file. It would learn every name. And somewhere above the clouds, a little girl slept against her father, carrying a silver moon over her heart, while the man who had nearly walked away thanked God he had not. When we look at Everett Cole's night of impossible choices, one truth shines through. Moral courage isn't reserved for heroes on magazine covers. It begins with everyday people who refuse to stay silent. Everett had no wealth, no allies, just a sick daughter waiting at home. Yet he stepped out of the shadows to protect a stranger and exposed the corruption strangling her empire. His stand proves that integrity is a daily decision. Each time we risk our comfort to defend someone vulnerable, we push the world a little closer to justice. The story also shows how empathy ripples outward. Everett's single act of compassion emboldened Marin Vale to face the darkness in her own company and opened a path back to the family he feared was lost. We never know how far our courage will travel, or how many hidden hearts it might rescue. So here's my challenge to you. Think of one place in your life where you can speak up for what's right. Then do it today. Let's build a community where ordinary bravery is celebrated and integrity is non-negotiable. If this lesson moved you, drop a comment sharing a time you stood up for someone and smash that subscribe button so you never miss a story that reminds us all to choose courage over comfort.